Wednesday, July 18th, 2018, Monaco 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. So aside from looking at the markets this morning, I want to talk about an author called Antony Sutton. He has some great books about the New World Order, about economics, politics, and how the world works. I think he's very underrated. Antony Sutton was born in the UK, but moved to the United States. He was born in 1925 and died in 2002. So after looking at what we're doing in the markets, I will talk about Antony Sutton. His work is very applicable to what's happening today and what's happened in the last 100 years, I would say. Very interesting. So it's just gone 8:12 London time. So yeah, the precious metals are being hit hard. They were hit hard yesterday. We broke key support in gold in terms of Federal Reserve notes. And why do I say that? Well, because the what we call a dollar is not really a dollar. It's an imposter. A dollar is a fine weight of silver, as we know constitutionally. This is how you need to think when the price of the Federal Reserve note goes up like this massively against gold. And you need to think, do you really want to finance the criminals in Washington, D.C., the criminals in Brussels, the criminals on Wall Street, the criminals in the City of London? Yeah, if you do, then go ahead. Get rid of all your real money, gold and silver. And yeah, panic just because their paper currency goes up in value a little bit once in a while. That's the way to look at it. Yeah, so right now we're at 1224.40 in terms of Federal Reserve notes. The low has been 1222 and the high 1229. Silver is 1547 right now, down 10 cents. And the range has been 1542 to 1563. The Dow future is 25,138. It's up 16. So not much move there. The S&P is unchanged, basically up a point at 2811. And the NASDAQ 100 is 7404, unchanged. I noticed that yesterday. I spoke about the NASDAQ. It was down quite a bit. And lo and behold, it closed a lot higher. So there you go. Yeah, it's just a game. Really, I would stay out of it personally. So what have we got in the currencies? Well, the pound has weakened quite a bit recently. Yesterday it was a big day down, and today we're back. We're below 130 right now, 130.97. It's down 17 pips. The low has been 130.78. So that 130 level is going to be key support now. As I said before, the pound or the Bank of England note is just another crappy paper currency printed out of thin air, ad infinitum. Just as bad as the Federal Reserve note. Federal Reserve note has a bit of leadership, of course. It will do better than the rest. But against real money, in the long term, there will not exist. Gold and silver will still be around in the future. These paper currencies might be around in name, but not in value. So the euro down 0.25%, 116.35. And the dollar up, continuing to go up against the Bank of Japan note or the Japanese yen, 113.07, up 0.2%. Oil behaving well for the banksters, down 0.5% at 66.80. So that's what's going on in terms of these markets. The 10-year yield, I spoke about the bond market yesterday. Right now, we're at 2.87%, the 10-year yield. So slightly higher than yesterday morning. Not much, by 1 basis point. So want to talk about, yeah, Antony Sutton. So who's Antony Sutton? Well, you read his Wikipedia here. Antony Cyril Sutton was a British-American economist, historian, and writer. And you look at his books, he'd be considered a conspiracy theorist, right? If you talk about what he wrote, if you call on a talk show radio like LBC and you try to explain to James O'Brien what Mr. Sutton or Professor Dr. Sutton wrote about, he will call you a conspiracy theorist. But look who his employers were. Economics professor at California State University, Los Angeles. Research fellow at Stanford University's Hoover Institution between 1968 and 1973. So Mr. Sutton started digging deep into his research, looking at real data, and found that there was a problem. And he wrote about it. I really highly recommend you Google his name or search his name on YouTube, Antony Sutton, and listen to his interviews. He did a really great interview with, forgot his name now. He's on talk show radio, alternative, of course. But I'll put the link above in the description and below, above in the cards and below in the description. And Antony Sutton explains, like, he was, the Hoover Institution is a very mainstream establishment institution. He explains how he went down to Miami Beach or somewhere near in Miami for the Republican National Convention. And he wanted to talk about how some U.S. corporations were actually financing the Soviets back in the early 70s, while in Vietnam, the U.S. was fighting, the North Vietnamese were being helped by the Soviets. He thought that was wrong. And he was told not to talk about that at the Republican convention. And then when he got back to the Hoover Institution, the director there said, never touch on that subject again. And then he started looking at other things, and then he just decided to leave because he couldn't really write honestly and be at the Hoover Institution. So yeah, he's not a conspiracy theorist at all. And one of the most interesting, videos and interviews he did was with Elizabeth Clare Prophet, and I haven't finished listening to it. It's an hour and 12 minutes. I've listened to 45 minutes of it, but I think you should listen to it. He talks about the secret cult of the order. That's a book he wrote in 1983. It's about Skull and Bones, how these people control, or not totally, but they're very influential. People like Averell Harriman from Brown Brothers Harriman, George Bush Sr. used to be Skull and Bones, George Bush Jr., John Kerry. And it's really interesting how he talks about the Hegelian dialect. So what's the Hegelian dialectic? Well, the Hegelian dialectic is finding, it's basically pitting people, society against each other, individuals. You find thesis, antitheses, and syntheses. So you create a problem, problems between different sides of society, and then you create a solution. You always keep people at each other's neck. And he explains really well how people who have been in the order, Skull and Bones, actually in public life look like they're like against each other, but they're just like puppet masters, like getting people against each other so they can bring a solution. And he goes on to say that their objective, of course, is to have a one world state, a one world government controlling the individual, and that they're better than everyone else, right? And some of the books he wrote, and he's got all references and data. It's not like he's making this thing up. And I really recommend his books. I haven't really bought his books. I've listened to a lot of his interviews, but I think I should start buying some of his books. So he talks about, there's one book called Wall Street and the Rise of Hitler, right? Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution, America's Secret Establishment, Order of Skull and Bones, that he wrote about, the video I recommend. The Best Enemy Money Can Buy. Well, that's just goes to show the thesis and antitheses, so that you can, two powers against each other. So what does that result into? Oh, results into defense spending, right? Results into wars, which are really profitable. The other thing about the Bolshevik Revolution, financed by Wall Street. Why would Wall Street finance the Bolshevik Revolution? Well, because he thinks it's because they wanted to, because Russia, such a huge country, 2-3 times the size of America, was a huge potential market, right? So they had to make Russia really inefficient socialist communist, right? Because they wanted to stay in Wall Street, didn't want the competition. So it's really interesting. The other one, the other book he wrote, Wall Street and FDR, right? The other one, National Suicide, Military Aid to the Soviet Union. I think that was the book that he was working on at the Hoover Institution that made him want to have to leave the Hoover Institution. It was written in 1973, and that's what he wanted to talk about at the Republican National Convention, and they told him not to talk about it. Why not? He thought it was immoral, and I totally agree with him. And he wrote a lot about technology as well, Western technology, Soviet economic development, how the West helped the Soviet Union, right? And there's another interesting one I haven't read from 1977, The War on Gold. So that will be interesting to read. 1995, The Federal Reserve Conspiracy. Wow, it's really interesting. And what about the Hegelian Dialectic? How does it apply today? Well, I think we can clearly see what's going on. The Hegelian Dialectic is that the establishment is trying to push onto us is the West versus Russia, right? Or the U.S. versus all the other countries in terms of trade. So is Trump really trying to, how can I say, get away from the Hegelian Dialectic? In some instances, it seems like he is trying to get away from the Hegelian Dialectic, like he wants to meet Putin and try to be friends. But on the other hand, it seems like he is applying the Hegelian Dialectic against China and the EU, doesn't he? And the other interesting thing that Antony Sutton talks about, Hegel, the German philosopher from Hegel was born in, late 1700s, and he died in 1830. So a lot of the people he talks about also in the video about the Skull and Bones, that there were some members of Skull and Bones in the 1800s who studied in Germany in the 1850s, 1860s, and they were inculcated with this Hegelian philosophy. And it's totally against the American ideal of the sovereignty of the individual, and that the state has to serve the individual, right? That people have inalienable rights. Because Hegel, in his philosophy, this is what he said, his philosophy as pertains to the state is, and I read from Wikipedia, Hegel's state is the final culmination of the embodiment of freedom or right in the elements of the philosophy of right. That's his book. And he goes on to say, the state subsumes family and civil society and fulfills them. So this is the philosophy of the New World Order, you see. that there's a few people who know better, and that everyone has to be subservient to them. That's the Hegelian dialectic. So really interesting. I really need to get some of these books. I never got one of these books, but because I listened to a lot of his interviews, but I think I need to really invest in some of his work. So I highly recommend that. Gold and silver, yeah. It's individual. It's the individual freedom money. So if you want to play the dialectic game, yeah, buy the stay in paper. The other point I wanted to make is cryptocurrencies. Of course, they've rallied quite a bit in the last 12 hours. Big move yesterday in cryptocurrencies. Our cryptocurrency, some people think it's a creation of the powers that be. It could be. It could be. The thesis is, let's say, sound money. Antithesis is the fiat money. So what do we create? We create the syntheses, maybe cryptocurrencies. I don't know. But that's why I have a little bit of cryptocurrencies, not that much. I still think the blockchain is a great technology, but in the end of the day, I think gold and silver are still way more superior. So if you enjoyed this video, please like, share it, subscribe to my channel if you haven't yet. You can also follow me on DTube, Steemit, and on Twitter. And I'll talk to you later. Take care. Bye.